So I've got a palette out here today. I've got 3 or 4 different questions on palettes. Something from Gabriel, and then but also something from a Minnesota guy, Pence 0008. I think I started talking about that at one point, but didn't finish. I don't think. And I thought there was one other person. I guess that's it. All right, so let's just get on with it. I'm going to try to read this. I'm going to put up some of these points online, but I'm going to read this whole question. There's so many points that it's kind of mad for me to do too much printing on the page. It'll be running by and by for an hour. Could you comment on palettes and pigments? This is, again, from Minnesota Pence. I've always used the Paxton palette for indoor use. And then he says, what do your students use? I recently took a class from a guy that uses the prismatic palette for outdoor use. He referred to Hibbard, A.T. Hibbard, as Boston School guy, as well as Gruppy. Is that right? Actually, it's not right. Gruppy's not Boston School, but definitely Hibbard is. He was the full 7-year program. In the past, I've always used a split primary palette for outdoor use. These are terms I don't actually know. It's bizarre how we, in our field, make up our own terms, and there's no dictionary that's ever been written that actually is the defining one that we all then go to and use. Maybe that's a calling for somebody out there. So then, and also I'll talk about those in any case where I think you're asking. What are your thoughts on palettes for indoor and outdoor use, and mediums too? I've been using a 3-1-1 mix of terp stand oil and 5-pound cut Damar for figure work. And then Gabriel's asking, could you talk about your palette and what kind of colors and arrangements you use with the palette with Gamel? I'll talk about this one. I don't have the Gamel stuff here, but I can explain it to you. Could you talk about your palette, what kind of colors? I'm sorry, did I already ask that? Yeah. Then, did he prefer a more chromatic one, or did he use a muted one and worked his way from there? Muted, you talk about earth tones, and you're talking about muted, yes. And his was heavy with earth tones. Did he prefer a more chromatic one, or did he use a muted one and work his way from there? Was it hard for you to provide yourself with oil paints at that time? Do you remember a historical brand you enjoyed more than others? I like the way Gabriel brings up the problems of money, costs. Boy, do I feel your pain. And beginning this, I actually could say on that point that I was drafted. I was right in the middle of trying to become a painter, and I got drafted. This is the end of the Vietnam War, so I didn't go anywhere. But I spent 2 years behind a desk, actually in Washington, D.C., in the transfer point, transferring guys out of the Army with their early outs and stuff, and it was a rewarding thing to have done. But the reason I'm telling you this is because it got me to the GI Bill, which was of use at the Art Students League. So I was able to study there. The time I studied there, I was able to do it on the GI Bill, which I didn't have to work a whole lot outside, and to raise other funds. It wasn't a huge amount of money. But in any case, though, it was enough to keep me sort of surviving in that mode. What made all the difference when I got to Gamel, of course, was that Gamel didn't charge anything, and I was able to find an apartment where there's a full studio and apartment. I mean, a painting studio and apartment for $95. Even in the 70s, that's ridiculous. I'd been paying that for a single room in Brooklyn, or in Brooklyn, when I was in New York. So. As I said, though, you always were aware of those things, but fortunately I was able to buy the brushes I needed. I never did anything exploratory with more expensive things. I used what was available at the price I could afford, and I've never regretted that, actually. I have a feeling for using, I like it when other people do too, a feeling for making do and making great things out of nothing and that sort of thing. One of the things I admire about our art form, actually, is that I say frequently that we are the most crude, most low-level art form there is. We get sticks on which we tie or glue pig bristles. And then we get other sticks and we stretch rags over them and coat it with something and paint. I mean, like that, how simple a technology is there. We're still doing that. I'm most amused by our world. But yeah, it actually is a very forgiving one, though, for someone. And a sculptor, too, in theory. If it's just dirt, it's just clay. Wouldn't it be nice if you just lived near some clay? I could tell more stories. I better stop telling stories about stuff that's unrelated. So let's go back to the pens at the University of Minnesota. I got the impression, 0008, that you are formerly a student of, possibly a student of the LAC people. Why else would you be using a Paxton palette? But my students use the palette you're looking at here. And I'm going to just try to hold it before you. But this palette is what I've reduced everything down to. I started with 19 colors with an impressionist named Brackman in New York. And it didn't go down much with Daniel Green. In fact, I think he may have added a couple other colors like sap green. And what I've reduced it down to, though, I've always been jealous of the guys. Say Zorn had a reputation for using 4 colors, and I wouldn't do that if I couldn't get color, because I love color and love full color, the full range, and the ability to manage the most nuanced shifts in color. So you need real quality colors that are strong to do that. But in reducing down, I've gotten it down to 5 colors in black and white. And but what's important, these 2 colors, obviously, this is Cadmium Scarlet and Cadmium Lemon. Those are both on Gamels. Well, actually, I think we used Vermilion possibly for that, cadmium. Might have been Cadmium Red Light, might have been Cadmium Scarlet, I'm trying to remember. Some of these questions you may want to ask some of the other former students. I spent such a while, and I gradually shifted for better results. I didn't shift because of some fancy, like I didn't do it just to explore something of somebody else's. I just found that I had piles of paint that I wasn't using. For example, from the Brackman thing, I found that, why would I keep having colors in there that I could mix exactly the same degree of intensity and that sort of thing? So things like that. But what I found myself doing, though, is getting down to where I had this capacity to get this intensity with the cold red, and there's the warm red, which already has that, and the cool lemon yellow, and then the cadmiums, which any of these colors, and then the ultramarine blue, French ultramarine blue deep. With any of these colors, you mix them down with white, and you'll find this really beautiful chromatic range that's rather in keeping with this. And the big deal in our way of working is that you have to be able to match the chroma of your greens ideally when you're painting a really chromatic orange passage, say, and you're trying to cool it, move it toward in a different direction. You want to be able to match the chromas at value. So that's the reason I do it, and I find this is the most serviceable one. I've never had any regrets. However, you'll see that there are 2 other colors in there. When I go outdoors, Sevres blue comes in, and then and this is cadmium. It's permanent green light, and those are the only 2 I add outdoors. Indoors, the black plus yellow is an excellent, or a warm green. I think, for my purposes, it does everything that any sap green ever did, which is that warm green that some other people use. And so my basic idea is this is the warm blue, this is the cold blue, right? Green there's a very cool green. And again, this is indoors, except for the ones I just mentioned. So I don't know how clear I'm being. It's hard for me to look and talk. I also arranged this, by the way, so that the light's in the middle. I don't like blacks near white or darks near white. First of all, it's hard to see them side by side when they're that way. But I just like the idea of going from light out toward dark, and the idea of going and just simply following the rainbow from the coolest red to the warm red, from the blue red to the orange red to the yellow to the green to the blue, just as a rainbow would do. So all those things give me a sense of order in the thing, and I do pay great attention. I recommend anybody who's studying painting think through the ideas associated with the Munsell wheel, which when you ask about actually, let me make one more point before I go to that. When you talk about prismatic color, but the black is over here because I can't see it very well. I often find, especially if it's slightly dim out, I find it's harder to see next to the blue, and I reach into the wrong pile from time to time. I find it easier to see, and that's the only reason it's out there next to the red. But it also balances the amount of colors on either side. But those are my kinds of feelings about a palette, and I'm very comfortable with this. I don't like the idea of having to pre-mix all sorts of stuff. These things sit there, and I mix as I go. The one thing you need to know about palettes, by the way, that may never come up in another discussion, so I'll bring it up now, is that The only purpose really for a palette, the way we use it, is for matching values and matching chromas. So, and what I say by that is, so you may mix, I'm going to tell you what the third thing is, but I was really trying to say that primarily there's only two purposes. So you mix a puddle of paint, you try to match a note out there, some spot, and you miss. And so you use that spot. If the value is right, you match that value, but if the color is wrong, you use the value puddle to match. So right next to it, using that value, you make the more chromatic or the more red, yellow, and blue version of that value. And you do the same thing exactly with the chroma. If the values, if the chroma is good, and you try to shift more toward a green, say from a yellow, or cool it off or whatever, you want to match the chroma so the puddle is there, and right next to it, you use it this way. And you'll find that, especially if you organize your thoughts, and anybody who's beginning has to know that color is made out of those three elements, just values, intensity, saturation, richness, whatever those words are you want to use, chroma, and then hue. Hue is just the relative, blue, green, yellow, red. Those are the hues. So if you know that, though, then you can easily adjust the color using your palette by having that puddle sitting there. Even if you mix a note and it's wrong up there, and it will be wrong. It's a pig in a poke, the first note you put up there. And so when you try to adjust it, you're going to simply use that as a takeoff point. It'll be your what do you call it? Your fulcrum. I don't know. That's probably as good a word as I can come up with. So yeah, all right. Let me get back to the other questions. I think I'm going to take my eye off this palette now because it blocks my ability to be with you. So yeah, I don't know what a split primary palette is. I don't know if that means we're using red, yellow, blue plus the in-between colors, orange, green and purple. I don't know what that is. So you might have to ask me further questions, 0008. But palettes for indoor use, outdoor use, mediums. Okay, so I use this indoors and outdoors, except that I add those two colors. That's the permanent green light and the Sevres. And then I don't use any mediums anymore. I'm way past that. I've tried everything, and that is one of those areas where I've tried everything. I painted with Merage in New York. It did amazing things, but it did nasty things over time. I found cracking. And the problem with a lot of mediums I found is that it keeps you from the obvious point, and that is, can you not hit the note? And so there are all sorts of nice, interesting devices and tricks and things that give you certain kinds of qualities. But I really do like the Boston School model, which was expressed by Paxton as the simplest is the best, and so I use nothing but linseed oil. And I've gotten rid of the rest. I don't like the irregularities, the drying times. I don't like terps in the first place because it's not an oil, it's a cutter. But you can argue that it's not. I don't even use it at the beginning of a painting. I might use it if I had to lay in a massive, huge thing just to cover the canvas and not waste a ton of paint. But I don't use it. I don't like it. I don't like it in the room. I don't like. A lot of people don't like breathing it, so it's not a very good one to have in the studio anyway. So those kinds of reasons are perfectly okay to control yourself with or think about when you make decisions. So I think that's it, and I appreciate that question. I'm sorry it took so long, 0008, to get back to you. So could you talk about the palette? What kinds of colors and arrangements? You got that, Gabriel. Now. I didn't. I take that all the way back. I didn't talk about Gamel's. Did you ask about Gamel's? Paxton palette. I guess that's still coming up. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. My palette, what kind of colors and arrangements I used with Gamel. Okay. So my recollection is that all these colors were on Gamel's palette, along with Naples yellow, which to me is just a pointless color, and yellow ochre, Indian red, Venetian or English red, and I think I switched to Venetian to get the color qualities that they claimed were there, or it could have been in reverse. And I can't remember if we had any of the umbers, and that's, again, I'd have to go back. I don't even know where I'd have any of that stuff written now. But that pile of stuff, Indian red, I mentioned that. Okay, what I found about those colors, though, is they were like one-use, colors, and sort of one-hit wonders, and the idea of the search for color, the impressionist search. I can neutralize colors easily. The hard thing to do is get life in the colors, and almost all those colors their life is in a very narrow band in terms of what I'm calling somebody called the muted world. Oh man, the earth colors are so dead. And, and I used to, when I was sort of just slowly growing out of that palette when I was teaching, I would suggest to students that, right here, I'd say, oh, we had burnt sienna on there. And then Gabriel would tell us all these places never to use it, like in the face, for fear of getting foxy notes in the skin tones. And, which I guess, what's his name, DeCamp actually has a little bit of. Maybe some of those other guys coming out of the Cincinnati group show a little bit of that tendency to go foxy, but that's the expression. But as I said, I'd talk about that burnt sienna. I would say, so that's use it in the shadows. It really works great in the shadows. You often see it almost like right straight out of the tube. But before I knew it, I actually found myself with a limited palette like this, and I would never say the name of a color again after that, because those one-hit wonders were causing me to do that. So I didn't have the mindset at that point that every spot. In fact, students have heard me say, let's, if it's black, just paint it black and white gray, and we'll go from there. If you see a gray, well, I would never do that again. I say with my grays, I say make it a color gray, make it a blue gray, make it a green gray. Make it a neutral, fine, but give it a color quality, color direction, and then you can adjust it. You can go through red, yellow, and blue, and adjust it to be more like what you want. And I used to be very excited about when I saw the Sirois Effects, when he'd paint neutral zones with really rich color combinations. Paxton's very good at that in the skin as well. But the idea of beautifully colored neutrals is a fascinating thing. And of course, their projective capacity. If you're using dead tones, they don't project across the room, and that's, what's that, So, so my palette. Let's see if what colors arrangements. So yeah, and it was sort of probably arranged rather like this. All these earth tones were puddled up around the red ones are all puddled up over here. I think that, I don't remember what else was on there, but it was just like there was probably at least as many earth tones as there was, as there are of these, what I call straight color, straight hue, prismatic color, if you want to call it that. So did he prefer a more chromatic one, or did he use a muted one and work his way from there? I think I've given you that information. Now, I went and copied a Paxton. One of my students owned it, and so I asked if I could use it, copy of the head. And I'll tell you, Paxton, I couldn't do it with the earth tones that Gabriel gave us. I couldn't hit the notes. I had to revert to cadmiums to even get close to his intensity. So Gabriel used to tell us that he didn't use them, but there's no way in the world he didn't use them in that particular picture. But who knows where that was, or whether Gabriel ever saw that, or whether it was an experiment. Who knows? But it was a perfectly nice head, and I still have it somewhere. I should have brought it over if I knew where it was. I don't have any idea. I could have showed it to you. But it was a copy it was the head part that I'm talking about. It had the chromatic, cheeky, everything from lipstick to cheek colors that were just like ridiculously chromatic. So would Gabriel prefer? I mean, look at his work. I mean, it's hard to find chroma in Gabriel's work. I think he preferred the earth tone world. And I shouldn't precisely say that, but his pictures aren't chromatic. The general impression of them is pretty muted. In fact, I remember seeing, the first time I saw a show of Gabriel's work, my reaction to it was how it looks like something from the 40s. It looks like old furniture, which I think is a kind of a tragedy. Paxton's work in itself does not look like old furniture. The color quality is so good. And Gabriel was the story. He's an intellectual telling stories with pictures, more of an illustrator. But I don't care. It's not, he's doing what he's doing, and he's intriguing as could be at his intellectual stuff that he does. But when it comes to the problem of making stuff sing, and I'm talking about visual songs, I think Paxton's got the better idea. Yeah, it was, I've told you about my difficulties. So do you remember a historical brand? So the brand of paints I've used right through my life, and I've tried all the other ones I've ever heard of. I still find Windsor-Newton and Rembrandt are as good as any. and and yeah, and and their prices are as good as any. So I've played with some of these exotic things. None of them amuse me. I've tried the ones that have the other mediums in them, and they, there are various issues with those that I find far more problematical than the simple, linseed oil based colors. And of course, my presumption is they're still linseed oil based. Talking about those two big colors. So, thank you guys. I think I've covered it. Yeah. Yeah, good. So enjoy that. Be sure to get back to me. This will be, I think, now the second, maybe even the third time I've talked about palettes. And I wish I could tell you which one it's in, but there is my palette. There's a list of my colors somewhere or other. If you like, I'll just go through this again. This is black. This is Alizarin Crimson. This is Cadmium Scarlet. This is Flake White, which I think is by far the best of all the whites and titaniums, and all those other ones are less brilliant, less capable of giving you brilliance. Cadmium Lemon, Viridian Green, and Ultramarine Blue Deep. That's the set. Wish I could tell you where to find that somewhere else. If I can think of it, I'll type it in. All right, good. Thank you very much. Do subscribe, share, ask more questions, comments, whatever you want to do. And what I leave out, like. There you go. See you next time.